Well, today is the big day for many. The Super Bowl. Some of the kids were asking this morning, why do we call it a Super Bowl? And I honestly didn't have an answer for them. I don't know. It's the biggest one of them all. But you remember how the football season started? The NFL referees were called replacement referees. Everybody hated those guys, especially if you were a Green Bay Packer. You just hated those replacement referees. And then it lingered, and everybody was angry at these replacement referees because they were lousy refs. They made bad calls, and they ruined it for your team. You know, the team that you've never played on? And the team that you only cheer for, they ruined my team. And these poor fellas, they're just trying to do their job, and yet half of the country is angry at them and wants to see them fired. They're replacement referees. They're terrible. In hindsight, they weren't that bad, but at the moment, the sense of needing of revenge and justice was being thwarted. These games were tainted, and nothing was going right. What's going to happen to the NFL? Do you remember this? Sports Talk Radio did, and that's all they talked about for weeks on end until it was finally resolved. The sense of being wronged, especially when it's something that doesn't matter. When you think about football, I know this is terrible to say, but it really doesn't matter, does it? Everybody say no. It really doesn't matter. Some of you are going, oh, careful, preacher, holy ground, holy ground, holy ground. It really doesn't matter. If you're wronged in a football game, does it really matter? If the referee misses the call on the baseball or the basketball court, does it matter? If he was out and he was called safe, does it? I mean, the scheme of everything, does it really matter? It doesn't really matter. When you're done wrong in that way and your team loses or your son or your daughter is called out at that moment, does it really matter? Not really. You don't believe me, I know. But it really doesn't matter when you're wronged in that way. But when you're wronged in a different way, when it becomes personal, when you're blamed at work for something and then you lose your job and it was somebody else's fault, does it matter? It matters a little bit more, doesn't it? It's not an abstract game. It's called a game. But when in life you're wronged, when a spouse leaves and leaves you at home, does it matter then? It matters. And how you respond to being wronged, how you respond to when something goes wrong for you, how we handle being wrong displays our Christian character and sets the future into motion. It means things when you respond properly or when you respond poorly. It matters when it's real life, when something happens to you. All the anger and the emotional energy and frustration spent on a bad call is misplaced. But when it happens in real life, when it happens to you in a personal way, that's when it matters. How do you respond when you're wronged? Last week we talked about how we handle the truth. Talked about Joseph and how he handled the truth of his dreams. Not just the truth that you've been given to give to somebody else, but also how do you handle it when someone tells you the truth about you? That's a little bit harder. When someone is honest enough to tell you the truth about you, how do you handle that? The story of Joseph and his brothers gives us an insight on how to handle the truth when it's delivered and how to handle the truth when it's received. But if you have your Bibles, turn to Genesis chapter 37. I think inside of the concluding part of chapter 37 tells us how we can handle when we're wronged. When somebody does something to us or to somebody that we love, how do we handle that? It can reveal Christian character in us, and it can also reveal or set the future in motion. The story seems to involve 7 different movements with 4 primary characters. They're all intertwined. Zach and I were talking about this week, how do we break up these sections? And you really can't. The stories intertwine together. So if we can just walk through this story and look at how these guys handle being wronged. Each one represents one aspect of being wrong, and I think we can learn from them all. So if you're familiar with the story, try to forget it. Okay? Some of you might know how the story ends. Well, Joseph ends up as almost the Pharaoh of Egypt. So it all ends well. Okay, well, pretend you don't know that. And if you didn't know that, I should have told you to plug your ears for a second there. But just pretend you don't know, because Joseph doesn't know. The brothers don't know. Jacob doesn't know how this is going to end. You and I do, but nobody else does. So try to put yourself in the position of not knowing how this is going to end up. Look at verse 12. His brothers went to the pasture their father's flock in Shechem. Significant place. Abraham worships there. Jacob worships there. This is also the place where the brothers, 10 of the brothers, enact a horrific crime of revenge against the Shechemites, and he slaughters several men. Doesn't tell us exactly how many, but slaughters several men. So these brothers are used to acting out in revenge in bloodthirsty ways, very crooked ways, and it happens in this place of Shechem. It's a wonderful place to pasture flocks. It's now a place at this time probably of great commerce. Israel, or Jacob, says to Joseph in verse 13, are not your brothers pasturing the flock in Shechem? Come, and I will send you to them. Bring back a report. And Joseph says, I will go. Now remember how this went before. In verse 2, it tells us that Joseph has been sent on this errand before. And whenever he comes back, it's never a great message. He likes to tattle on his brothers. So you can just imagine going, yay, I'll go tell on my brothers. Woohoo, let's go to Shechem. And then verse 14 through 17 is a story where he goes to Shechem and they're not there. And it says literally that he got lost, or he was wandering in the field. Look at verse 15. A man found him wandering. And the man asked him, what are you looking for? And he said, I'm looking for my brothers. In verse 16, they came here to pasture flocks. The man says, well, they moved from here. And they went to a place called Dothan. So Joseph, after his brothers, went and found them at Dothan. Dothan is an interesting place. It's a trade route. It's like living right off of I-20. Okay, so they go from Shechem, which is kind of tucked away, to a place of I-20 where there's a lot of trade going from the Asia down into Egypt. Israel was placed in a very specific location because trade routes ran through the whole thing. God did that on purpose. God put Israel right in the middle of the world. People would go in and out of Israel and learn who God is. And so Dothan is a great place where traders migrate back and forth sending their goods. And so that's where they find themselves in the city of Dothan. So this is where Joseph is. He's kind of naive. He gets lost, not very familiar with how the trade routes work or where his brothers might be. And so in verse 18, when they saw him, that they being the brothers, from a distance, before he came close to them, they plotted against him to put him to death. You just imagine, they're sitting there, they're pasturing their flocks, they look over the horizon, and here comes this irritating thorn in their flesh. They do not like him. He's their half-brother. The family unit, like we talked about last week, is completely destroyed. There are 4 women that are related to Jacob. He's got 2 wives and 2 concubines. All 12 kids come from 4 different women. They're all thrown into one place. And Jacob, much like his mother and his father, loves Joseph and Benjamin more than the rest. Creates jealousy, as it says in 1 through 12, and hatred. So there's distrust, there's hatred, there's jealousy, and envy. Envy is an incredible thing. It's powerful. It sets into motion all kinds of action. When you envy something, and then you're jealous for something, and then you hate the person who has it. These brothers are envious of their brother Joseph because he has their father's affection. They're jealous for all the attention that he gets and the things that are going to come his way because God has given him this dream. So they're envious, they're jealous, and they hate him. And when you get to hate, now you're going to really go over the edge in your emotions. These are all passion terms, and it speaks to their heart and how much they hate him. And so it's not surprising to see that they're going to plot against him to put him to death. I can just imagine Joseph walking, hey fellas, how are you? And they're sitting there going, boy, glad to see you. What's going on? Dad wants a report, and I need to take it back to him. So how are things going here at the front? And they said, this is their plot. Here comes that dreamer. Don't even say his name. They never do. Now then, come and let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. And we will say, a wild beast devoured him. Then let us see what become of this dreamer. Hi, fellas. How are you? Oh, we're doing great, dreamer. Guys, you've pulled practical pranks before. You know when the guy comes walking in, you know that he's just walked into your little trap. And it's just a joke, and you sit there going, watch this. Ah! That's what they're doing. They're watching it. Here he comes. Let's throw him into a pit. Now, a pit could be a well that's gone dry. And you would just throw stuff in it. Varmints would fall in there and die. It could be mushy on the bottom and ugly and dirty. And it's not a place that you'd want to, be at all, ever. And so they said, let's throw him into a pit. But Rueben heard of this. Rueben is the oldest brother. He's the one who has position and authority within the home, within the family structure. And so he probably has the biggest axe to grind against Joseph, because Joseph is getting everything that Rueben should be getting. Rueben should have gotten the varied colored coat. Rueben should be loved more. When Jacob dies, Rueben should get most of the blessing and the inheritance because he's the oldest. In fact, his mother, when he was born, named him Rueben and said, maybe now my husband will love me. No pressure, Rueben, but your mom's got a lot riding on you. And you know what? Didn't work. And so I wonder what his mother relationship was like, because he did not cause his father's affections to turn towards her. In fact, nothing happened. Even after the fourth son, nothing happens. And so here's Rueben. He should have a position of esteem, and he doesn't. He was pressured even at an early age to draw the affections of his father to his mother, and it didn't work. And so here he is, wronged, probably more than all of them, and he sees Joseph. He hears all of these rumors, and this is what he decides to do. He says, he heard this, and he said, and he rescued him out of their hands. Let us not take his life. Rueben says in 22, shed no blood, fellas. Throw him into this pit that is in the wilderness, kind of off and away, but do not lay hands on him. And then you get his motive, that he might rescue him out of their hands to restore him to his father. Now, before you start thinking he's a hero, he's really doing half right, isn't he? He's half right. How do you respond when somebody does you wrong? Sometimes we just try to do a half right. He should have said, fellas, don't touch the boy. Dad loves him. Don't touch him. He should have stepped up and used his position and said, guys, we should do no harm to him. But he doesn't. He tries to do half right. You know what half right equals? All wrong. Half right doesn't equal half wrong. It's all wrong. And you'll see how the story ends. He tries to do half right. And sometimes when we're wronged, we try to do half right as well. That guy just cut me off. I should swerve up to his left and tell him about it. But I'm not going to. I'm just going to ride his tail for the next 3 blocks. You've done that, haven't you? That guy took my money. He robbed my business. I should take him to court. I should do everything to run him out of business, but I'm not going to because I am a Christian. I'm just going to make sure that everybody I know knows never to do business with him, ever. I'm going to talk bad about him everywhere I go. That's half right, but it's really all wrong. They're talking bad about my friend. I should step up and say, stop, that gossip is wrong. I'm not going to. I'm just going to sit here in silence and pray. You should step up and say, stop. Don't talk about my friend that way. You did half right, which really equals all wrong. And in Reuben's story, he does half right. And it doesn't go well for him, so he walks away thinking that maybe he is going to rescue his brother. He's taking the big things off the table. Don't kill him. That's a big one. And he just says, throw him into the pit, and then I'll rescue him. But he's half right. He's not anywhere close to being wrong. He responds without giving it all the truth. Judah, on the other hand, shows up in verse 25. They take him in verse 22 through the 24. They take his coat off. They throw him into a pit. And if you just imagine, this was not here, we're going to set you down into this pit. This is probably a shove, a toss. And so when he falls into this pit, I don't imagine him being gracefully let down. I imagine him falling in there. Maybe he gets hurt. Maybe he lands head first, face first. He's in mud. He's in whatever carcass is down in there. And it's just an awful, scary, dark place. And they drop him in there. And then notice how they respond. Then they sat down in verse 25 and they ate. That's cold, isn't it? They fired up the barbecue, sat down there, and just had a wonderful meal while their brother is in the pit, probably screaming, thinking his life has come to an end. And for all he knows, it is. And they sit down and they have a wonderful meal. And then they raised their eyes and they looked, and behold, a caravan of Ishmaelites was coming from Gilead with their camels bearing aromatic gum and balm and myrrh on their way to bring them down to Egypt. It's the trade route, remember? And so here comes the traders. Judah says to his brothers, What profit is it for us to kill our brother and cover up his blood? There's no money in it. We can't make any money off of this. This is a cold-blooded guy. There's no money in killing him. I got a better idea. Let us sell him. Let's replace the word kill and put the word sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. For he's our brother. He's our own flesh. Isn't that sick? He's our brother. We can't kill him. We'll just sell him to the traders and make money off the deal. So at one point, he sounds like he's being all merciful and kind, but in reality, it's even colder. So I can just imagine how this works. Then so come, they do that. His brothers listened to him. Then some Midianite traders passed by, and so they pulled him up and lifted Joseph out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. Thus, they brought Joseph into Egypt. Now, you got two different people groups there, and what often happens is they travel together. Okay, so you got the Ishmaelites and the Midianites. This is I-20, okay? And so you got a lot of people coming back and forth. So it's not contradictory. It's just saying there's groups of people coming as the Ishmaelites, the Midianites, and they sold them to the Midianites, which was also the Ishmaelites. They just happened to talk about the Ishmaelites, not the Midianites. The Bible is not contradicting itself. It's just talking about one specific group. Thus, they sold him into slavery. Now, can you imagine how this went? Use your imagination. So they drag him out of the pit. Joseph's thinking, prank over. What are all those guys for? And then Judah's over there going, how about 40? Can I get 40? The Ishmaelite says, no. How about 10? Come on now. Help me. Help me now. How about 35? The Ishmaelites say, we'll give you 12. Come on. 12? Look at the boy. He's strong. He's young. He's healthy. Give me 50. How about 30? Okay, how about 18? How about 20? Can you imagine that? And if you're the brother hearing all of this, how about 20? Judah says, sold. Joseph's sitting going, what's going on? And from what the text seems to reveal, Reuben's gone. So Judah is taking the lead and sold. And so they give him 20 pieces of money or shekels of money. And Joseph is then bound and thrown onto a cart. And I think of the scene of, you remember the movie Gladiator? When he's being sold and hauled off? That's kind of what I imagine there. He's on a cart with a bunch of stuff heading to who knows where. Gone. And then the brothers sit back. Judah's got the 20 pieces of money in his hand, and he's watching his brothers drift off into the sunset as he is hauled away. Reuben is half right. Judah is all wrong. But at the end of the day, look what happens to Reuben. Reuben comes back to the pit, and behold, Joseph was not in the pit, so he tore his garments. That's Old Testament language for being of great grief. You tear your garments in sorrow. He returned to his brothers and said, the boy is not here. The boy is not there. Where do I go now? Where do I go? Where do I go? And it's probably at this moment that Judah says, yeah, we sold them into slavery. Here's your 20. Here's your 2. Everybody gets 2 coins. Here are your 2. We sold them. Hey, we made a profit on the deal. And Reuben is crushed. He tried to do half right. You know what you end up when you just do half right? You end up all wrong. And that's what happens to the story of Reuben. Destroyed, distraught. When you try to take revenge, and that's really what this story is about, it's taking revenge on somebody. And it's interesting when you think about revenge. When they sell Joseph into slavery, they're really not taking revenge on Joseph. It's their dad. Joseph is just in the middle. Is it Joseph's fault that he was born by Rachel? How many of you all had a choice on who your mother was? It's not Joseph's fault. Is it Joseph's fault that Jacob loves him more than anybody else? That's not Joseph's fault. Now, he mishandled all of that, but is it Joseph's fault? It's not his fault. And so really, in many ways, this act of revenge is striking out against Jacob. Jacob is that fourth character who has done all of these things that are wrong in managing his household, and it's finally coming home to roost. Jacob has lied. Jacob has been deceitful in all kinds of ways, and it is finally coming back to get him. And his sons are acting out of revenge, fueled by envy and jealousy and hatred. Striking out against Joseph, who, while is not perfect in any sense of the word, none of this is his fault. And most often when you try to act out in revenge, you're going to hit somebody, it's not their fault. There's going to be collateral damage. It's going to hurt somebody who had nothing to do with it when we respond in revenge. And so the brothers have to come up with their story. So they took Joseph's tunic in verse 31, slaughtered a male goat, and dipped the tunic in blood, and they headed for home. They get to their dad, and they say in 32, "We found this." Did they find that? They didn't find that. "We found this. Please examine it to see whether it is your son's tunic or not." Don't even say his name. Is this your son's tunic? You can imagine this being Reuben's responsibility to say this to his father. And they said in verse 33, then Jacob examines it and said, "It is my son's tunic. A wild beast has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces. The lie has worked." Their dad bought it, that this was the result of a wild beast coming and killing Joseph, and all they could manage to get back was the tunic. Joseph is gone, and you can imagine verse 34, "So Jacob tore his clothes and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son many days. Then all of his sons and all of his daughters arose to comfort him." Think about that. The 10 boys who knew the truth. They could have said at any moment here, "Let's go get Dad. We lied. Joseph is alive. We sold him to some Midianites who took him to Egypt." They could have rallied up a caravan and went to Egypt to deliver the boy. They could have saved him. There was time, but they didn't. They sat there and they tried to comfort their dad. "Oh, Dad, it's okay. Joseph was a good boy. It's okay." They try to get in with their dad. They try to be his comforters, but his dad will have nothing to do with it. He says, "Surely I will go down to Sheol in mourning for my son." And so his father wept, and they all stood by and did nothing. They might have comforted him, and you could say that is something, but when you have the cure and you don't administer it, then what you're doing is nothing. If you have the cure for malaria and you just say, "You'll be okay, don't worry about it," when you can actually give him the pill to save his life and you don't, all of your words are empty, they mean nothing. They stand by and they watch as Dad cries, Dad mourns, and they refuse to help, and they refuse because they're jealous, they refuse because they're envious, they refuse because they're filled with hatred, and they don't care who gets hurt. And that's what happens when we act in revenge. This chapter is filled with emotion. It's not filled at all with thinking. In fact, God isn't mentioned in the whole thing. Another thing to add is some Proverbs. Proverbs 27:4 says this, "Wrath is cruel and anger is outrageous, but who is able to stand before envy?" When your revenge is fueled by envy like theirs is, nobody could stand in front of envy. James 3:16 says, "For where envy and strife is, there is confusion in every evil work." Is the Bible not true? The Bible's true, because this is evil, what's going on here. Proverbs 14:30 says, "A sound heart is the life of the flesh." In other words, integrity is the life of the flesh. But when you compromise it with envy, it's rottenness to your bones. It will destroy you from the inside out. One commentator combined all of those verses into one sentence. It says, "Envy is the root of almost every sin against our brethren, and whenever it is harbored, there is an end of all peace, rest, and satisfaction. Envy is the rottenness of the bones, and no one can stand against it. Where envy is, there is confusion and every evil work." Their revenge is fueled by what they want. They want something that they have not had, and they're right. They're right to feel this way. They're right to feel anger at their dad. They're right. But how you respond when you're wronged will display your character and set the future into motion. And they respond in a way that is evil and hurtful, not just to Joseph, but to themselves. And the rest of the book reveals how this just eats them up. So how do we, as Christians, respond? Because you've been wronged. I know you have. I know some of your stories. You've been wronged. How do you respond? First thing is to imitate God. Imitate God in that. Think of how God has responded to being wronged. He's been wronged a lot. Does He wipe out mankind? No, we're still here. Bible tells us to imitate God, but here's a harder one. Follow Christ, to get it real close and personal. It says in Luke 9:23-24, and he was saying to them all, that's Christ Jesus, if anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross daily and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake, he is the one who will save it. These brothers are trying to save their lives. And when we act in revenge, we're trying to save what we should get and what we want. And what Christ calls us to is to self-denial. Yes, you were wronged, but I don't think Jesus deserved to die on a cross either. Do you? So how do we respond? We forgive. As Christ forgave the thief on the cross, so we forgive. As Christ forgave those who nailed him to the tree, so we forgive. And the hardest thing to think about forgiveness is how far do you take it? One image that someone gave to me many years ago, and I love it, is when we think about revenge and we think about anger and hatred, you just imagine you're squeezing somebody's throat. And think of all of the energy. In fact, do that with me. Do this. Put your hands out here and just pretend you're squeezing somebody's throat and just exert force. And feel the muscles pulling in your back and in your jaw and in your head. And notice your eyes are going to focus on this. When you're holding anger and when you're holding revenge, this is what it feels like emotionally. And I think what the Bible is calling us to is to do this. Now feel the release. Do it. Go back. Do this. Squeeze real hard. I'm going to kill that guy. Because that's what you're thinking on the inside. I'm going to run him into the wall. Okay? Now release it. You feel the stress just leave your body? That is when you let go of anger, hatred, envy, jealousy, and revenge. Let it go. And forgive. And now your hands are open. God can't get anything to your hands when you've got someone's throat. Okay? Let it go. And feel that God can now put inside of you a sense of peace, of rest. You might be right. You were wrong. You were treated poorly. He left. She spent. They spread bad rumors about your business. They defamed your name. You're right. Don't walk around like this. Because all of your energy is going right into that. And odds are whoever did the wrong to you doesn't care. They're gone. So there you are doing it. Just release it and forgive. And the next step, someone will say, well, now you need to release so you can restore. Don't worry about anything else. Just release. And you can feel your muscles. You'll even breathe better. I bet you'll sleep better. I know your existing relationships will improve. And I know your relationship with God will be better. Because when you do this, now God has the freedom to work in your life and in somebody else's. For you wronged God. And what did He do? He released. And He paid the price for our sins so that we can have a relationship with Him. And that's how we're supposed to do that with our spouses. That's how we're supposed to do it with our children, our co-workers, strangers. Just release. And give it back. These poor fellows did not. The story ends with Joseph inside of Egypt in verse 36. Now, meanwhile, the Midianites sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, Pharaoh's officer, the captain of the bodyguard. And if you don't know the end of the story, you might be thinking, well, does he become like the captain of the bodyguard? I picture like Secret Service guy. You know, this kind of guy who walks around doing this. Is he going to be target practice? Is he going to be a punching bag? What's going to happen to JoJo? I mean, where's he going? What's going to go on with him? What's he doing? I don't know where that came from. What's he going to do? Don't think about the end of the story. Think about Joseph on a cart, headed to Egypt. What's going to happen to these dreams? And how is God going to bring those dreams back to life? What's going to go on? But really, the thing I want you to take away from this morning is, how do you handle being wronged? How do you handle it? We've all been wronged. How do you handle it? Is it revenge? If it is, it's going to haunt you the rest of your days. And it does Judah till the end of the story. In fact, I think I can make an argument that the story of Joseph isn't about Joseph. It's about Judah and how God brings Judah back into a healthy relationship with Him, because Jesus is from the tribe of Judah. And so there's redemption in the story of Judah, who handled revenge wrong, but God brings him back. All of these things come to be. What's fun is the next time these brothers meet, you know what it's around? Food. I find it interesting that they sat around and ate as they thought about his death, and then Joseph sits around and talks about their life around a meal. It's a powerful story, great. If you're looking for a place to read, 38 to the rest of the book.